Thank you. I am very glad to be here in Pamplona. Ya es la segunda vez y disfruto mucho trabajar con los estudiantes. I was asked to speak in English, and the presentation will be in English. But I know also that I have a very strong German accent, and it's not so easy to understand. So if there's a misunderstanding, just raise your hand and ask. The program, what I want to speak about is the framework, my motivation, why I'm working now since 30 years in ecological architecture, why this topic is so important for me. And I want to document in a very fast, like a film, going through the time of different selected projects of our office to give an impression what the architecture looks like. And then I will look to topics which seem very important for me. It concerns the building materials, then the energy productive house, the active house, and the urban design. And at least I will prove those general ideas how to design on two examples. One example is a retrofitting, and the other one is a new plus energy building, netto plus energy building, and to come up going back to the framework with a summary. The framework of today, I think that good architects always have to react to the situation, not just in a technical way. We don't just optimize, we also try in a cultural level to understand what the present says to us, what is the future development, and how can we solve with our building problems which are existing today and which are existing in the future. This is a bookkeeping system watching the development in the world. It's a so-called footprint, and they have studied how much our globe is producing on fishing grounds, cropland, and so on, and how much we are consuming. And what you see here is the world's biocapacity. It's what our globe is producing. And we started with the beginning of the 70s to use more of the biocapacity of the worldwide production, which the globe can give to us. We are using more than this. It's like if you have a lake and you take out less of the fishes than yearly are grown of the new fishes, then you have a growing number of fishing. If you take out more or less the same amount of new additional fishes, then you have a stable situation. If you take out more fishes than during the year newly born, then the number of fishing is diminishing rapidly. That's the situation what we are doing. And our consummation equals to 1.5, close to 2 worlds. That means we are taking more from the globe than the globe can produce. And it's a critical situation. And with the time, in 2050, we would need 3 globes. And my question is, do we have it? Can we go on like we do? And I think everybody agrees that at the moment we have even not a second one, and we have not a third 3 globes. And therefore we are misusing our globe. What is the situation in Austria? It was a world where we are living on a level. So if everybody would have the same consummation like Austria, we would need more than 3 globes already today. And I think it's a situation which is not acceptable, because we are misusing the food and the production of the globe of our kids and of our grandchilds. It's our consummation in Austria. In Spain, you use a little bit less. With the crisis, it was going down, but you also need 3 globes. We don't have 3.5, and we don't have 3 globes. So we have to change our way of living. There are some agreements, like the agreement in Paris and now in Bonn. And what concerns us as architects is especially this warming up, because on one hand we have to build our buildings stronger, because the wind, the rain will be much more and much stronger in the future. We'll have more disastrous situation. And on the other hand, we have to stop completely the exhaustion of CO2. So it has to be a very different kind of building to stop exhaustion of CO2 in building, in using and recycling our buildings. And we have to stop the exhaustion of greenhouse gases. So also the communities, the European community reacted to it, and they were making roads so to reduce to a very limited to about 10% of CO2s in 2050. If we go on with this reference scenario, we would fail and we would end in big disasters if we reduce just in this way. Especially in building, we have really to reduce and to exhaust no CO2 anymore, which is not so easy because until 2050 we cannot renovate all old buildings to a level of passive house or a minimum of energy use. Therefore, we have to compensate with very productive house, say 2050 still existing old and not renovated houses. How is the progress in Austria? We have some progress in buildings. We have diminished in the last century the exhaustion of CO2s in buildings, but by far it's not sufficient. But we have still big problems in traffic, because in traffic we have still a growing exhaustion of CO2. And in many ways it concerns also us as architects, because the urban planning, how we organize our city, is causing a lot of traffic. But we have some success already, because, for example, in private household, we have a growing number of units. In Austria, the population is growing. And we have a growing number of floor area, because the average square meters a person uses is growing too. And despite of this growing number of floor areas, the exhaustion of CO2 is going down. By far not enough. It should go down like this, but it shows that it's possible that a growing stock of housing doesn't need a growing number of CO2 exhaustion. And the object behind was already written down in this comment in 1987 in this Brundtland report, that we should try to have a development which meets our need, but at the same time it gives a possibility for this young man to survive. What does it mean in architecture? I show pictures during the decades, the last 30, 40 decades we were building our project, because it's a little bit how the general development was in architecture in respect to ecology and to energy. I am running my office together with my wife. She's also an architect. I'm sorry that she couldn't come with me this time. It's my office, waiting for a contract, and visiting one of our buildings. I'm teaching in different schools, in the Danube University, a new university which is specialized in green building. It's a technical university, and I am organizing and participating in this 3-week summer class. I have some leaflets about it because some of your school have participated already in this. It gives credit. It's not expensive because I have good scholarship, and I participating also in the design week. It was the first building. It's a co-housing project with 10 units. It was in the last century, already 33, 34 years ago. It was the beginning. We tried to have more participation. We tried, after the second oil crisis, there was a growing consciousness of the limited resources to use alternative energy. And we tried to use more non-toxic material, because in those times asbestos was used and a lot of toxic material. It's a social housing, subsidized housing project. I'm still living in this unit here. We overcharged the solar gains in relation to the insulation. Today we do much more insulation, but in those days it was very curious to have 8 centimeters of insulation, in this case of cork. It's a situation we have to care also for the outside. Then we got some participation in a competition. People ask more and more. It has already this building, the passive house concept. It's not a passive house, but it has a ventilation. We started with thermal collectors, and we're using passive cooling by sun protection. These balconies are protecting the facade against sunshine. A sun deal as a symbol for this relation to the sun. Bigger thermal collectors, passive solar use incorporated into the ventilation system, a special form to cause shadow in summer, more biomass into the buildings, or social housing in Vienna with a passive house technique, but not yet passive house, with extensive use of passive solar use. Office building closed in summer, of course, or a home for elderly people. Inside, passive use, or a village for a development for tourism in a lake in Austria. We always have one family houses, a new attic in this old house here, or a home for disabled people, a house for an office for a firm which produce natural swimming pools, social housing in Vienna with passive solar use. We did a lot of kindergartens, and PV already used, or remodelation of this old house here, or adding on a old house, clay house, or a city hall which was renovated before and after, or active house with PV and thermal collectors, PV in a kindergarten, remodelation, restoration, or another kindergarten, or a luxury house, a passive house, an old house, and addings to the old house, a double house made completely out of straw and clay, this house, or a test house, an active house, a small house above Vienna, or in a northern country, a plus energy house, a house for 4 families, passive houses again, or a competition we did win for a big office. We didn't build it. Another office, or for Marrakesh, an education center, a competition project for a university from the west side, or for refugees, for self-construction, a project where refugees could build their own home, or retrofitting, taking away the roof, or a one-family house, an active house, a plus energy house, or here a housing project which is under design at the moment. It's just a little bit the development in our office to give an impression of the kind of architecture we are designing. Important topics, of course, we have to see the whole cycle of designing, building, using a house, and recycling it. To have a good basis to be sustainable, and we have to look to the life cycle cost and the life cycle ecology of a house. One of the topic is building materials, and the other one is the energy productive house, and of course the urban design is very important. Building materials, it is new because after having come to a very low level of energy consumption to condition a house, having a passive house, we need just a tenth of what an old house has needed to be heated. The energy for building a house in former times was about the same energy you needed for this house within 6 years. The new house is 10 times more effective. That means that the energy for building the house equals to 60 years, 10 times more for heating the house. Or even more, because this modern house needs more energy to be built with more insulation and so on. So it doesn't give sense to lower the heating demand of a passive house. It gives more sense also to look to the energy demand we need for building the house. And it's a relatively new topic, but very important. It's a passive house, the gray energy for building is more or less the same with what you need for the lifetime to run the house. This means we look not just to the energy for running the house, we also look to the energy for building it. How can we do it? We have to use solar-produced products like clay, mud, like straw, like drying the material with the sun. For cement, you have to burn it with 1,700 degrees. Of course, it's a big exhaustion of energy. If you do it with the sun, there is nothing bad for the environment. Or to use straw for insulation. Here it's an insulation for a roof. We did in the Czech Republic. We use very much CLT. It's wood which is cross-laminated. And we try to get more and more prefabrication to make it less expensive. This material is straw is a deposit of CO2. We take from the environment the CO2 which is deposited in this material. In this development, in the competition, we were asked to have a more environmental building site, because during building, we are producing a lot of waste, we are producing a lot of dust, and we need a lot of energy for transportation. And therefore, we suggested to transport with train. And all the heavy material were brought in with the train, and the last 6 kilometers they were transported with a truck, which gives much more environmental impact than the train. And also the building parts are minimized. It's just 16 centimeters of concrete. Also all the cars were coming in were checked on this side, and if there was a polluting car, or if they were coming from a distance more than 60 kilometers, they had to pay penalty. It was penalized to a very long transport. What was reached with the whole development, we did about 70 units, but it was 500 units because the competition was sized for having a better building site, there could be reduced the transportation 75%. And here, to make it visible, normally for such a development, trucks are cycling such often around the world. And it was reduced 70-45, so the trucks which were serving the building site just circled about 4.5 times around the world. It's a lot of exhaustion of CO2, of dust and so on, and it's a big reduction we can do. But it's not just a technical way. In our building part, we suggested to do it also with architecture, and we suggested not to have the parking plot under the building, but more or less in the first level, not to dig out so many material and transport it. And it ended up that with this concept, for one parking place, we had just 6 trucks going to the site. Other ones had 15, 16, 11. So architecture, without costing nothing, because here is the level, the original level of this site, and above this level is the garden. And for this, because we didn't bring away so much material, we saved a lot of kilometers for the truck. So architecture is very strong mean without cost to reduce environmental impact. We could go a step more with this project, because the client was a firm which is producing clay products and natural colors. And he wanted a building which should be completely clean, also in the bioclimatic level. And therefore, we were using just few very clean, not as an environment harming material. One material is clay. That's where we were taking it from. It's a controlled clay. Next one is straw for insulation. It has changed already, because in Austria we have a firm which has certified straw, which is grown without toxic fertilizer and so on. And second, we were using wood for the construction, and we used some glass and close to no metallic parts, because for iron it's a lot of processes, it has a lot of environmental impact. How did we do it? It's a general, it was prefabricated, and there's a construction with piles here, and they are separated to have no thermal bridges. Inside and outside is a layer of wood, and it's filled with straw. Here you see these columns here. They are linked in few points, and it's filled with straw. On both sides is wood, and this wood is covered with clay. These parts are prefabricated in the factory, and they are brought by train to the site. Why by train? Because the trucks have a very strong environmental impact. They are producing fine dust, and they exhaust much more CO2 than an electric-driven train. Therefore, it's better to transport heavy goods on train or on railway to transport it. They are quite heavy. We were lucky because the construction had a connection to a rail, and also the rail is passing by at this side. So it was coming in, those parts, and directly from the train we could move it to the building. It's this mounting it. And also there are no metallic ducts, because normally in passive house you have the air ducts, and the air ducts normally are made with steel. To avoid this, the air flows through those sun-dried clay bricks, and it's sealed to be airtight with a fiber with clay in it, which is airtight. And the air comes out here. Also, the floor is made out of clay. It's a system how it works to avoid toxic materials. Because in construction, workers have a lot of illnesses, especially the painters. And therefore, those workers here, always natural materials, will not have any healthy problems. But it's not just the workers. The client was arguing that in this case, the bag from the vacuum cleaner can be deposited at the compost because it's not toxic. If you have a very toxic building, the dust also will be toxic and you cannot deposit it at the compost. The recycling is limited. It's inside, it's recycled clay bricks. They are more than 200 years old. It's a long-lasting material. It's inside this building. It's an office building with a communication area here. And the result shows it's if we would have built it in concrete, the exhaustion of into the environment, it's 3 factors, the CO2 and other things which are combined would be such high. And in our construction, it was just 1/5 of it. We compared it with other ecological building, and also we have less environmental impact. This is a really reduced environmental impact. It's not just the material. It's also when we are building, we are destroying the environment for the plants, and we are for the biomass, and we're destroying the environment for animals. One of the animals in risks are the bats, the birds which are flying in the night. In old buildings, there's a possibility between the roof, and it's a double roof, and we have holes here. And together with a specialist for bats, we were planning an area so that so sensible birds can survive. It took a long time. After 8 years, we have seen the first bats flying around. And also the biomass is extended because we are taking away from the original grounds this area of biomass, and we have a little bit of more biomass here on the roof. It's also protected against termites. Do you have termites here? Yeah? In Austria, we don't have termites. Yeah? But the client was saying more or less in 10, 15 years with the climate change, which is a reality, we cannot avoid it anymore. Something like 2-3 degrees are for sure, even if we stop completely the CO2, exhaustion of CO2. And therefore, it's a construction. You see you can check the underground of this building to see if termites are coming in. Because termites eat straw and wood inside because they don't like the light. And therefore, I think in the respect of resilience, it's important that we care for those things we know already. Stronger wind, more rain in a shorter time, but also new animals which are coming to our climate. The system was going into production, and you can order this kind of houses now in Austria. A lot of one-family houses are now built with this system. It was the first project after having the prototype, and it was very nice to see it. It had a nice smell, and it's the first layer of clay. Inside there comes a second finishing layer which doesn't crack anymore. It's a passive house on a very nice site, and the final surface. The transparency here, of course, is very important if you have such a nice site. We are visiting always with all the office, the clients to get a feedback, which was a good feedback because we got a cake. What is important for me is to close those cycles. There's this Cradle-to-Cradle movement, and their idea is to close the technical cycles and the biological cycle. The biological cycle goes through compost to have products which get rotten, and it's a new earth, and then you can use it again. And the other one is the technical one. The technical one is you disassemble the house, you reuse all products, and then you have closed the cycles. And if we have closed the cycle, then it's better for the environment. We are not anymore distributing all the toxic materials around the world. So after good planning, we also should take time for planning. After building the house, we have to run the house. I focus here on the technical, on the energy aspect, and we try to produce in 2 steps. The first one is to diminish the demand of the house, to have as few losings as possible. Because if we have a very small demand of the house on energy, then it's quite easy to cover it with alternatives, because the alternatives are quite weak. And if we have a big losing of heat, of coolness in summer, of if we have few light in the house and so on, we have a very big demand, and we have problems to cover it with alternatives. So the first step is to come down with the demand. It's the climate in Austria. We more or less have no overheating. All is concerned with heating. It's a psychrometric chart. Here you feel comfortable. It's few days in Austria, but the most of it, it's too cold. How can we do it? We can do it in the classical passive house concept. This passive house concept has worked out very clearly the strategy to diminish the demand. We will see it on an example, this passive house concept. It was a built prototype. We have to insulate very well the opaque parts, the not transmissible parts. In this case, it's done with paper chips. We have to have good windows, triple glasses in my climate, passive house quality, not to lose too much energy through the windows. We also have to make very carefully details, because bridges, thermal bridges, become more critical. And if we need just 1/10 of the energy, then a thermal bridge, which was before about 3% of losing, now is 30% of losing, and therefore those details are more critical. Of course, it's much more work for the architect, and we are in problems if the client doesn't pay more for such a design. How does it work with the ventilation? It's a typical passive house. We have the transmission, which in a row house in this could be about 50 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. For transmission, the losing we still have, and for ventilation about 35, because we need fresh air. But it's compensated partly by internal heat, by washing machine, by cooking, by your body and so on, and partly covered by passive solar gains through the windows, if the sun is shining in the heating system. So we end up with this 85 kilowatt hours minus 15 and 30 kilowatt hours. So the heating demand for this house is about 40 kilowatt hours. If we have additionally a heat recovering from the ventilation, you all know it from this passive house concept, then we can reduce it again, because we can recover from this 35 kilowatt hours about 27 kilowatt hours in example, and we end up with 13 kilowatt hours for heating, which is a passive house, as you know. So we have come down. Old houses might have needed 200 kilowatt hours for heating. In the 80s we had 150, in the 90s we had 100, and now the regulation is about 50 kilowatt hours per square meter for heating, and with a passive house we have just 15 kilowatt hours. What we see in this old situation, it was very few what we needed for water in relation electricity and for our mobility. If we are already at the level of passive house, it gives sense to look also to warm water, to electricity, and to mobility. Therefore, this thing is more or less done in a technical way. We know how to do it. There is praxis, there is experience with it, but we have also to look to those parts. And to cover those parts, we need an active house. We have to produce it. So what are the resources? How can we cover it? We have normally resources on the side. And those resources are the sunshine. The sunshine we can use for passive solar use, active solar we use to produce warm water, photovoltaic, and other resources like stored energy in the earth, in the water, to use the wind. Since all those resources are relatively weak, we can fortify it with a heat pump. If we have from the earth 15 degrees, we cannot heat it with, but with a heat pump we can bring it up to 60 degrees to produce warm water. So the question is where we take the energy from. Normally, traditional, we take it from petrol, from gas, from coal, from uranium. This is the yearly world demand of energy. And normally we cover it with those resources. This has two disadvantages because those cubes become smaller and smaller. But this is not the most critical point. The more critical is by burning this material, we are using the oxygen we need for our bodies. And if we burn all those resources, there will be no air left over to breathe for us, which is not intelligent. We also could use uranium, but this is very risky. But there's another resource we have, and it's shown here. It's this huge cube. This huge cube is the yearly solar radiation on Earth. And since it's so big, I think it's better to cover this small demand from this big cube. And additional to, indifferent to those cubes get smaller and smaller. This cube never gets smaller because we get it every year again. So I think it would be fine to cover it with solar energy and to forget about those energies. How can we do it? There's passive solar use, active thermal use, and photovoltaic use. Let us have a quick view to those different technologies. We were thinking, how does a building look like which is an ideal passive solar using house? In a passive solar using house, the house itself is a collector. No additional cost, but quite tricky to handle. The solar radiation, which is short wave, can pass easily through the glass. It's touching the building mass. It's converted into heat. It's long wave. Long wave have problems to go through the glass, and therefore this building mass is heated up. But to do this, the house has to look to the north and to let in all the sunshine into the house to gain as much as possible. It looks to the south, it opens to the south. Second is, what would be an ideal house for active solar use? It would be the opposite. It's not adding a technology to say a building. If you consequently think about this active house has thermal collector. They are not the house itself, they are outside. They are producing heat, and if you want heat, you have to be compact, you have to be integrated into the building, not to lose heat. And the house looks to the north, completely the opposite, because this house is closed, it turns to the north, and all the sun goes to the shoulder of this house to get as many energy as possible for converting the sunshine into hot water for heating and hot water. Third technology, photovoltaic. What are criteria for photovoltaic that it works good, that you get the most out of it? You have to orient it to the summer sun. They are sensible to temperature. If a photovoltaic normal technologies get hot, it does produce less. It's the opposite. The thermal collector, if it gets hot, it produces more. As a photovoltaic, as hotter it gets, as less it's producing. So it's about 1 degree more, 0.6% less. Therefore, we shouldn't integrate it. It should be ventilated. It should not have shadow, because shadow stops the production of all the photovoltaic field. Therefore, for us, photovoltaic is again a different house. Photovoltaic, for me, it's a flying part of architecture. High up, not to get shadow, and very good ventilated to have low temperature and to have a high productivity. Passive solar use, the house as a collector here separated from the house to handle it easier. It's social housing in Vienna. Active solar house closing the building, but with a very nice painting on it. And PV, in this case on the roof, not to have shadow and to be good ventilated. We have to watch very carefully the going of the sun. It's different here than in Vienna. And what is fascinating, if the house, the architecture is reacting to the going of the sun, to the weather, to the climate, we will have different houses in all different climate. And it's a good point to get again local architecture, not an architecture which, like today, which is equal everywhere in the world. It will give more local identity. It will give the possibility to have different architecture in different parts of the world. How to combine those three different architectures? It's the work for me, for the architect, to bring together, to work out a strategy within a sound, a good architecture, this different strategy. In this case of the prototype house, we use this for the active thermal use, for photovoltaic, and for passive use. So it's a combination of this. That's, for me, in respect to energy, the work of the architect. It's in this case, the yellow one shows the area where we can harvest energy. The passive solar use at first, we want the sun in the collector, which is the house, during winter. It comes in, the sun goes up in summer, it shouldn't go into the house because it would overheat. Next winter, sun comes in without moving anything in the house. Next summer, sun is blocked again. The passive solar use, if we have sunshine in winter, it's heating up the house. It's just for a short time, and during night, we can store out the heat which is in the building mass to keep warm the house. Does it function? The test in a built reality, it's in winter, full of sunshine if we have sun, and the sun is blocked in summer, no sun on the glass, and in the inside, in summer, it's nice to have no direct sun. There's also diffuse sun, which we also have to handle, but this is the basic not to get an overheated house. We have thermal collectors. We have the photovoltaic producing electricity. It's very different because in passive solar use, we get out the energy from the sunshine about 60–70% in passive use. In active thermal collectors, we get out about 60%, could be more, it could be less. In photovoltaic, how much do we get out in photovoltaic? It's about 10%, 12%. It's just a few apart, but a higher level. We could also work with biomass, how much of the energy of the sun we get out when we burn biomass. What do you guess how much it is? It is just 1%. But we have big areas of forests. But it's important for the architect to work with this, to know it. So photovoltaic does close to produce nothing during winter. Therefore, it's not optimized for winter. It's optimized for summer. We have to give shadow to cool the house in a passive way, especially to east and west side. We have to have a good ventilation. In this case, it's in the mountain, in Conferencia, and we have very good cold night, and therefore the house is good ventilated. And if it's higher, the point of the incoming air to the outcoming air, the ventilation is more effective. It's those windows here. We have a heat pump, and in this case, the heat pump can get the resources, the energy from different fountains within the house. One is the ground, overheating from summer, from the collectors we store in the ground. There's very few left over because in the ground it's not isolated and you are losing some of the heat. But it's a little bit warmer. The ground can be 1, 2, 3 degrees warmer in the critical time in winter. And through the heat pump, we can use also this energy. The heat pump serves different energy resources. One is from the collector, the storage tank. It can be cooled down to 0. It can get energy from the earth collector. It can get energy from outside, from the air. The firm was saying with the time, this heat pump is even learning. It's a prefabricated product, the storage tank, the heat pump, and all the connection, because very often simple plumbers miss fitting the connections, and therefore it's good if we have a more complicated system. It's good to have it prefabricated. Also, we can use the wind generator, or deep dwellings, we can use the geothermy, or it's more at the surface under a garage. Those pipes are taking the coolness in summer from the ground and the heat in winter. But for me as an architect, of course, it's not sufficient to have more and better energy performance. It's also important to offer with those strategy better qualities to the client, to give more quality, to give a better architecture. It could be daylight using, better, more sane materials, more contact to the environment, and not at least also to make progress in architecture. Architecture is not something which is completely separated from the world. It also is a process, and as an architect, I want to develop, to have progress also in architecture and in aesthetics. Daylight is very important. It also saves energy because we need less electric light if we have more daylighting. Therefore, the lighting is very high up, and normally the regulation in Austria has we need 10% of the floor area in glass, in windows. Here we have 70%. Therefore, it gets later dark, and of course it's more pleasurable because we have very few light during winter. We get depressive, and if we have more light within, we will not be so depressive. It's very high up the light, coming from here, coming also from the roof. So from the north side, from different sides, which gives a better shadow situation. More sane building material. It's wood, it's paper, and it's clay. It's massive clay, 6 centimeters in this case, to get some storage mass. We have a very nice view in this case. It's the Italian mountain in the south side. And of course, also this is a resource we should offer to our client. And with this strategy, we can make the house more open. Sometimes you see these passive houses with this very small window. I think this is not a quality. We have more quality if we use those resources. You don't see because it's against the light in the south, but we open it to the mountains to get this energy, this human energy for the inhabitants too. It's this transparency, and this transparency because it's a special situation. There are no neighbors, and therefore we were able to open the house so much. Of course, it's important not to build one family houses. It's just a prototype because one family house have bad surface relations. They are causing traffic, and they have no or close to no possibility to be very ecological. So it's better to use more concentrated, more compact houses. We developed the system even more far, and it's a other prototype with bigger PV installation. It's a house like this. So I think the form of houses, the color of houses, how a house looks like is changing with this new time, with a healthy environment. It's all this is PV, thermal collector, passive use, and protection against summer sunshine. The objective is to produce more energy than what you need for conditioning the climate in the house and for all your needs in the house, but also to cover the electric demand for your mobility. If our houses can cover all the energy the house needs and all the energy we need for mobility, we will have much less problems with the environment, and we can technically do it. It's easier than in the single house in the urban design. In the urban design, in this case, we used this prototype, and it's seen from above with a lot of photovoltaic. And I think that those new strategies can give developments a new identity. This orientation to the sun, this working with the nature, gives a new, locally determined by climate, look to a development. So if you imagine you are the sun, you are in winter here, you are very down, and you can look into all these units to heat them up. In summer, people in the units don't like you as a sun. In summer, you are going high up, and you can't see anything of the inhabitant. You can't look into no one of the units if you are the summer sun. It's blocked. It keeps cool the units. We have here two local grids, one for heat, one for electricity. That's what we need for our houses, electricity and heat. So the the net for heat is like this. It has one house. It has a thermal collector. the heat can be used in the house, or it goes, it also has a small storage tank. If it's too much, it goes into a pipe which is circling around the whole development. It's 120 units. This pipe, the water in it is on a low level. It's just 30 degrees to diminish the loosings. If we have too much heat in summer, we can store it into the earth by very deep drillings to store the energy in the earth, and also in summer to get out some coolness. And in winter, it cycles here, and if a house needs energy, it takes the energy from this grid, and it has a heat pump to bring the 30 degrees to 60 degrees, or to heat with the 30 degree, and to run this house. So it's a closed circle, and we have enough production to cover all the heat demand of this development. The other circle is on electricity. Because normally if we give in the electricity into the grid and take it out permanently 2-3 times a day, the the electric grid gets into problems. You have heard about this intelligent net which should solve those problems. I think we can solve it locally. If we have a local grid, if we have a local system, then we have very few need to connect with the public grid. In this case, the house has a lot of PV, it's producing electricity, and it's using the electricity in the house. If it has not enough, or if it has too much, it's connected with the local grid, and the local grid of electricity has a center, which is also a local center, like a community house. And here we can store some energy, for example, in batteries for weekly or for some time to store it. And we can feed the cars, because it's enough electricity for mobility too. The offering in this development was that we don't build one-family houses, we build detached houses, and the savings of the cost allow us to offer to a buyer for the same price a house which produces all the energy the house needs, and which covers all the energy they need for mobility. So the cars can take the electricity from this center. And just if there is too much, and we have by far too much, or if we have problems, we connect to the grid, and the grid can easier operate. It's again the village, with a different view, and how the architect is imagining it. It's all these PV installations, the thermal collectors, going with bicycle. No cars can enter this development. The problem is we have a lot or too much heat and energy during summer, because there's a lot of sunshine even in Austria. We have not enough heat, not enough energy in winter. So the idea is very close. Let's take the energy from the summer and use it in winter. But how to do it with electricity? Batteries are not good enough, because batteries are losing a lot. For a long time you can't use batteries. One technology which makes it possible is the electrolyte. If you make electrolysing process, then with this electrolysis you can convert water and electricity into oxygen, into hydrogen. This hydrogen is a gas. You can mix it with conventional gas, or you can convert it in methane. A little bit you get of heat. In this project, we have an area which was before a gas producing station. And in those days, they were producing gas from coal. It was a disaster for the environment, and the ground is completely toxic. And now they want to convert it. It doesn't operate anymore. We are heating with Russian gas. And therefore, they want to have a development, or is in process, the design of a development of housing, of social housing. The topic were, for this project, young living, for young people to develop concepts. We suggested to work here with photovoltaic on the roof. This electricity can be used to convert water, which we have very much on this ground, into hydrogen, and to mix it, because there's a big storage area for Russian gas, and to use this gas to produce in winter, or when there is not enough electricity, into gas. Because gas can be stored for a very long time. It doesn't lose the energy. So it would be a solution, and I think this is very good for it. There's nearby already a power station with photovoltaic where you can bear shares. It's participating, you can participate in this. And we suggested to enlarge it on the roofs of the building. With this, surprisingly, all the other projects signed that they allow also to cover all the buildings. It's about 500 units, 700 units, with PV to work in it. But the grid of Vienna didn't accept it yet. But I think it's a future technology we should think about. It gives hope to solve this problem, to store electricity. Two examples. One is a renovation project. We start with before. It's this housing project of the 70s. We had made a lot of investigation. We found out that older people have no access anymore because there are just steps to the house. It's on a hillside. And everything was covered with electricity from the grid. So warm water and heating, warm water was done with, and also the heating. There are some metallic wires in the concrete of the floor which are heating it. It doesn't work anymore, and it costs a lot of money, and it's a nonsense to use electricity for heating, because you can do other things with electricity. Therefore, the first idea of the client was to change into a gas heating. But for this, you would have to install radiators with water in every room. But since this is already occupied, it would be a disaster if you make all this installation in every room which are inhabited already. And therefore, we suggested, wouldn't it be better to make a passive house? Because if you don't have more heat loads than 10 watt, you can heat the house with the air. We make a controlled air exchange, and then we don't install in every room a radiator. We have just a hole above the door of every private room, and here we blow in the air. They have the good air quality of passive house, and they are heated without going into the private rooms. We were speaking with everybody. Of course, crucial are the installations. Therefore, those are all toilets in this house, because this is very important for ventilation and so on. The strategy of renovation, it's a roof. We take away the roof. It's taken away here. Then we build new houses, a new attic on the roof, because it's a resource which exists. It's allowed here, and we can use the rent of those houses to finance the passive house renovation, because people living here have limited rents, and we couldn't raise the rent very much. Therefore, we were saying we put on the top of the house new buildings, and to have less load, we did it in wood. We have a new elevator. We also built a new house, and the elevator of the new house gives access for elderly people, for disabled people to the old building. And also the old building get elevators, the elevators here. We were exchanging the windows. The old windows were taken out, and new passive house quality windows were given in. We closed the balconies because it's a thermal bridge here, and we were closing them with new windows. Here it's the old one, and now it's closed, and it's additional living area. We have the very good insulation according to passive house quality. We have very good details. It's a lot of detailing. It's also passive house quality at the roof. Here you see how strong the insulation is. We have the ventilation system, and in this case we have a corridor, and from this corridor you can come into every room. And therefore we have intervention just in the corridor, not in the private rooms. There's the central heat exchanger. The air is sucked in here. It's blown out here. It's using passive solar use. We studied how is the sunshine, where we do have shadow. We have a thermal collector here, and additional, it's a big storage tank. The rest is heated with biomass. Where there is a risk of overheating, we have these things here to protect against sun. We have the biomass to cover the rest of energy. So with biomass and thermal collectors, we have not any more CO2 exhaustion concerning heat. The additional new building, and a lot of communication with the client. We had to convince them, because any single client had to sign to allow this change. So we met, we were visiting similar buildings, and we had a lot of discussion. The planning. Every family was invited to convince them. We showed them how it will work. And there was a discussion to get the license to build, but there were neighbors, they were fighting against the building. So our inhabitants were fighting against them. Finally we gained, and we could start to build. The new building here, the building process, the new houses on the roof. It's growing. It was a very good organization, because every family had the option either to go for 3 weeks to vacation or in another house, or during the planning time we got 3 units free. They could go in one of those units. But during daytime or in the evenings they could go in their units, because everything was like it was. Just in the corridors there was some changing, and after 3 weeks they could move back. We had a very good firm. Here is when which family has to move out. It's a changing here, the old situation, the old ducts for ventilation. It was just exhaust. The new ducts for ventilation, a new installation, and the new toilet, a little bit smaller. And in the corridor here we have all the insulation, and there is just a hole, a dust-free hole, and the air is blown in and it goes back under the door, and no private room is touched. It's a building process, the result, so a big festivity when we did open it, and you see also the architect profits from the building. What it looks like, ingoing air, outgoing air, the new attic, which is very attractive because it has a good infrastructure, the very nice view. The elevator, here you come to the old house, here to the new one. It's another exit here. The new one, the air ducts, because it's also a passive house. The view from the new house to the old house, what it looks now. And the results, and you see the average is about 14 kilowatt hours. Some need a little bit more, some need less. and there are 3 different buildings, and we have quite good results. It's before and after. And finally, one new building. It's an office building for a firm which is producing wind parks. We made before similar projects. It was an office, another office building, an office building for artificial lakes. We have seen the production of these buildings. This was a competition building. And finally, we did this building, which is for a firm which is building and running wind farms producing alternative electricity, and of course they wanted also an alternative building. So it was before, and the idea in all those buildings is that in the north side we have all the offices, because no direct light should come in, and the other part is the part where they discuss with the client, where they have recreation and where more temperature change is allowed. Because if you work in the office, it has to be always the same temperature, always about 22, 23 degrees. But this permanent, same relative hot temperature is not good for our body, because we are used to have a lot of changing of temperature. And therefore, we accept in this area a higher or a lower temperature. And we were argumenting, if you go to the toilet, if you go to copy something, your body gets stimulated. Your blood circulation gets stimulated because it's different temperature. And with stimulating your body, the client gets more productivity. But we always have discussion how much productivity we could stimulate. In here, we got with computer simulation proofs that it will not have less than 12 degrees. The new building, it's a firm which has not just money goals, it also had goals for social goals, organizational, cultural goals, because they feel obliged to their shareholders, which are investing in this firm for ecological reasons. You can buy for 500 euros a share here, and it's really coming from the grassroots, this firm. And also economic goals, but they were very scared that it's also cultural and alternative. It was a competition project, and it was nice because there was asked a general planner. We were in charge of everything, of physics, of supervision in the building site, and we had to offer it already in the competition. And we worked together. Most of them are close friends of us. And those are the competition project, and already in the competition they compared the life cycle cost. So some projects were in the beginning cheaper, and this is the growing cost after 31 years. And it shows how much different the cost is of different projects. Ours was not the cheapest one. The idea of this project is it's a wind firm. They are running wind parks. And therefore all other projects had beside of the house a windmill. But it doesn't work in a valley because they have a wind park here on the mountain, and there is a very constant airflow. But in a valley and near to other building, you have a lot of disturbances in the wind, and it's not good for producing electricity. And therefore we were arguing it's not a good idea to show a not good working windmill beside of the house. And therefore we designed a house where you go in and you get a look to this wind park, which is owned by the firm and operates in an ideal way. And this was constitutive for the design of the building. So it's a building, it looks exactly to the wind park. It's one office, and this is a barn where they repair things and where they could handle, they have reserve parts. They are monitoring wind parks, and if a windmill doesn't work correctly. They are going here, taking some parts and bringing them out and repairing it. It's a system. Again, all the offices are looking to the north, because at the north we have just diffuse light and computer working, and therefore we don't need any screen. It's a very simple concept. It's by architecture avoiding also overheating, because offices have a lot of person, computer, and so on, they tend to overheating. And if there's no sun into it, it does not disturb, and the computer work, it also doesn't tend to overheat. It's different, the communication area here, which is exposed to the south and has different temperatures, and you are close to nature, because those firms are working with the nature, and therefore they like to be very close to the nature. Second one, it's completely flexible, second floor here, and there is a gallery, and this is the barn. It's a built building, here's the datas, and there are behind energy concepts. It's one aspect. Of course, architecture is more. I want to look here to the energy strategy. The energy strategy is at first of all in building. So it's built with wood, solid wood, CO2 storage. We have a concrete wall in there in the middle. It has a static function, and it's also a storage. So this energy is used very well, because we have passive use, and we also want to store the summer night coolness within this wall. A very simple principle, very easy to build. The barn is completely made out of wood. It's a facade. It's filled with paper insulation. It gets outside soft wood, and this wood is covered with plaster. Inside we have sheep wool as an insulation material. The wood is covered with clay plaster, and also here we fill in the roof paper. It's also a social thing. We had a lot of communication. We were working together. We were responsible for everything, and the clients had a representative, and weekly we met to discuss everything, which makes it with less conflict. The energy concept, again, the same strategy. First of all, energy conservation to diminish the demand, and second, the energy production in the passive, active house energy. Energy conservation is done by the high insulation. We see here we have 22 centimeters of cellulose and additional 6 centimeters, so it's close to 30 centimeters of insulation material. Of course, a lot of detailing by the architect. For example, the north window has inclinated a facade to have a better look to the sky and not to stop the incoming light. We have the passive house principles. We have the ventilation system with heat recovering, everything open to make it not expensive. Passive use, the same strategies we have mentioned before, and you see for passive cooling, every glass is in shadow in summer. Here you see the shadow. That's a thermal collector, it's exposed, but all the glass has to be in shadow in summer. It's the date. It's inside, you have in summer good shadow, that's passive cooling. The energy concept for energy production, it's winter, passive solar use. Again, imagine you are sun, you are very down, and you have a deep look into the building, heating up this concrete wall, which is a good material for energy storage. It's the 7th of January. Inside, full of sunshine. On these few days we have sunshine, and people enjoy it. They work in the computer and they get sunshine. They can be in the sunshine to recover and to get light, not to get depressive. Thermal collector, vertical, because it's for winter use, because they don't need much warm water. They need heat for heating. the storage tank, additional sheep wool insulation outside. It's also for soundproof, and it's separated so that the heat from the storage tank doesn't go into the building. PV roof, 4,300 square meters, good ventilated, and PV in the facade. The converter, which can make noise and it gets a little bit warm, therefore it's outside at the corridor. And its architecture. In this case, we could decide the exact design of this photovoltaic, how much is the distance between the cells, what does it look like, and this has influence into the architecture. It's like a sundial going through the this area, through this communication area. I wouldn't like it in my office, but for communication it's nice to see, to have this movement inside the building, and we have to decide it. The cars are filled from the energy from the house. Good night ventilation. So night ventilation, there are shutters here, and if in summer it gets more cold outside during night, all these shutters are opening. They are secure against rain and robbery. And to make it even better, this ventilation, we have generators, wind generators. Here are the wind back, the generators on the top. They are run with wind and they suck out the air so that we have really a very big air exchange, because we need about 10 times air exchange to cool the building down. Of course, it wasn't too easy because there is an opening in the building shell, and we also had to make it in passive house quality. So we had to make a lot of details, and at the end, nobody could guarantee that there will be no condensation and there will drop down some condensation. So there was a lot of discussion. At the end, we moved it from here above the blends, and if there's some condensation, it goes to the blends. It's also reducing electricity demand by having a wind generator, a wind turbine above the ventilation, the mechanic ventilation. The air comes in here, goes in, is ventilating the building, and the old air goes out here. And where the old air goes out, we have this turbine, and if this turbine sucks out the air, the machine needs less electricity. It's very small, it's not economic, but in this we had a research program on it. It's step by step to reduce the demand of energy. We have a wind mill, a rotator, but it's not producing electricity because it wouldn't function here. But so slow running rotators, they are not sensible to disturbances. They work also if the wind is changing permanently, and it's mechanical work. So this on the hill is for electricity, but in the valley it's not for electricity. It's mechanical work directly used for a pump. We pump water out of the ground. So it's not producing with the windmill electricity, electricity runs the pump. It's directly the mechanical work to pump the water. What do we pump the water? The water comes out. It's this fountain here. It's pumped out, and the water goes into the server room because the server is producing a lot of heat, and it has to be cooled, and the water is cooling the server. Then the water goes back in a cistern, and from a cistern we can water the lawns. The grass and the plants are served with this water. If we have too much water, then it goes back to the ground. But it's closing a cycle again, not losing the water we are taking out. We also have deep dwelling, so it's this machine dwelling down. So the warm water in summer runs here, goes down underground. It's coming back cold, and through a heat exchanger is circulating through the wall. So you see this wall is full of those pipes which are cooling the wall, which is cooling the building. We also have a heat pump, so in winter we can use it to take out heat from the ground. And this is the finished building. It's some points we realized here. It's from the east side, the flying roof, the flying photovoltaic, the shutters. From the east-south, the south facade with this shadow, architecture is moving. The barn, the north side with the windmill, the car, they are going, meanwhile the car takes its energy. Inside it's also cotton here and clay plaster painted and open wood in the roof. It's a communication area, it's a social area, it's nice in winter with sunshine, and this moving architecture inside and outside. The result, we were monitoring it, and in those projects it's very important to optimize through monitoring. So it was the first year, this is what they need, and this is the PV productivity. This one is not included in the building because the product or the mobility for a net zero energy house is not included. But with the time, they were successful buying new cars, more computer, but the demand was, the use was diminished by optimization of the system. So even in the third period, the need, the consumption was lowered, but on the other hand, the need was bigger. We tried to prove if it's possible also to cover with the energy all the computers. Yes, it's possible. Or can we cover all the mobility? Yes, it's possible. We say it's an office you can move with. And that's what it looks like, because it was also important to give an picture for people passing by. So summing up, we are coming already to the end. It's like a comparison, a plane. It's a plane which is very destructive to fly because it gives a lot of harm for the environment. So companies are doing something against it. For example, in KLM, they have organic wine, at least in the business class, or even they have certified coffee, or some of the fishes are certified. They even call it EcoJet, another company. Is it already an ecological way of transportation? No, of course it's not, because it's the same. Some companies even diminish the use of petrol, but still it's very destructive. So the technicians try to optimize it. It's the same technique, but it has PV and so on, but the bit is they can't transport very much. Yeah? So it's poorly optimization of a given strategy, which normally technicians do. As architects, we have to do more. We can think in a cultural way, in the principle of moving. In this comparison, might be an airplane looks like this. With problems still, you all know, but it's a different way of movement because it needs much less energy. It's lower. It's a different and new architecture in this way of traveling. And I think we have to do the same in architecture. With this, I want to say thank you. I think I'm still exactly in time. It was really a pleasure that you had a lot of attention. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I want to bring a book to the library of your university. It's about integrated solar technology. It was edited a week ago. I could contribute a part of it, and it shows also some of our projects. And I want to donate it to the library of your school. Thank you very much for listening.